glad you were talking about Europa Europa, Reed, because I can actually talk about things that aren't cartoons. So,
well, I may not have watched either of the movies I said I was going to, but I will be doing a deep dive into the filmography of Andrei Tarkovsky. So there's that.
That sounds great.
Sounds good. Sounds very good.
Yeah. So this will be fun. All right. Welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show, everybody. We've returned once more to drown your ears in film discussion. Under your consent, of course. You can always turn this off. Anyway, we are going to have a lot to talk about, as you may have deduced from some of that preamble there. We're going to be all over the place today, from My Little Pony to the films of Andrei Tarkovsky, with Europa Europa in there, too.
Yeah, I think we might have a good episode here for a scattershot as this all is.
I'm certainly hoping so.
Yes, I hope. So one thing that came up right now, and I guess I'll spoil it now. There's a lot of talk of circumcision in the movie I had to watch, and it was an actual somewhat important.
Yeah. I actually have a really interesting sort of conversation point about that, to be honest.
Okay, very good.
Considering what that movie is about, and like I hope that like conversation doesn't just evolve into like historical hypotheses surrounding national identity or something vague like that. I hope we actually get to talk about a movie here.
I still know very little about this movie, so I'll be interested to hear about it again.
It's hard to get a hold of.
Okay.
I remember I was only able to see it. I remember when I tried to find it once, I just had a nightmarish time, and I didn't really come across it until I took a class that just happened to have it, and I was really glad about that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Well, we will get to all that in due course. For the record, I have nothing else to talk about this week besides what will occupy my time in the main slate. Actually, that's not quite true. I have a couple things, but I'll open it up to you guys first. What have we been watching lately? I understand. Oh, okay. We have nothing. That's good.
Yeah.
That may be for the best. I mean, I just want to get into one quick word, which is that I've entered season 4 of Mad Men, which is really becoming something quite extraordinary. The show, like, just when I thought I had kind of gotten a handle on the rhythms of its storytelling, it has, I won't say switched things up completely, but switched things up, like, just enough to make me kind of have to reorient myself a little bit, but in a very good way. Like, it is quite superb what the show did with its 4th season, at least so far that I've seen. Okay. I'm only about halfway through, but I just watched an episode called The Suitcase, which is highly acclaimed, and justifiably so. It's really quite extraordinary. Just, it's a incredibly well written and well observed, like, character piece focusing on a relationship that has always been important to the show, but has never really been thoroughly explored. And so to see that being finally addressed in full force was really quite wonderful. So Mad Men, it's good.
I want to ask a question: does this show actually act like a serialized show? Or does it try to be one of those like somber, like 8-hour movies that a lot of like prestige television is?
No, it's a serialized show. It has episodes, it has chapters. I mean, even like something like The Wire. I mean, I wouldn't say that show operates as like a 10-hour movie, although it does in a way. Each season is kind of like its own like novel in a way. Mad Men is definitely, it has a foot in that, like, Sopranos world where plot threads and things carry over between episodes, but each episode feels like its own distinct hour of television.
Okay, so, this might be like something right up my alley. Maybe I should just dive into this.
I think you would find it really compelling. You are very much in tune with historical, detritus than I am even, and the show is littered with that.
Especially like I kind of find delight in sort of picking apart, because I don't give a shit about like how quote unquote historically accurate something is. That's sort of like vague nebulous term. I'm more concerned about it in like, is this a good representation per se? It's almost like when we're talking about adaptations.
Yeah.
It's not about like the nitty-gritty. It's not about like how much of it is translated. It's about like how that translation occurs.
Yeah, I think you'll find a lot to really compel you in this show.
That's up. Yeah, maybe I should do that. Maybe I'll write that up somewhere on a post-it note so I don't forget like I always do.
All right. All right. That's about all I've got. So let's dive right in here into the main feast of things that we're going to discuss.
God, where do we want to start with this?
I have no idea. We are all in such disparate corners of what we've decided to explore this week. So,
oh boy.
Anyone who wants to can fire away.
Because like John, Reed and Tyler, you two can come up with something resembling coherent threads, considering Andrei Tarkovsky is a Russian director and Russia is featured prominently in Europa Europa.
Yeah.
I don't know where the fuck to fit My Little Pony in any of this.
John, since you've seen Europa, would you like to talk about it with us?
I'd love to. I love this movie.
Let's start out with this. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is Europa Europa, released in Germany as Hitler Junge Salomon. Just Hitler Eve Salomon.
Yep.
So it's a 1990 film from Agnieszka Holland. And it is based on the autobiography of Salomon Perel, who actually makes an appearance in this movie as another gentleman.
Ooh.
Which I find a little strange, but oh well, that's fine. Okay. So do you want to just like, so John, do you just want me to give like a plot synopsis, like a quick plot synopsis, or do you think it's just too all over the place?
Well, I've talked about this movie before, not necessarily in detail, but this movie has been on this podcast space before, so. I don't think we should get like too in the nitty-gritties, but can I do a plot synopsis? Because trying to explain it to my girlfriend was actually a very fun experience.
Yeah. Considering I was kind of that there's just a lot.
Yeah,
I noticed that there's just a lot.
The movie concerns a small German Jewish boy whose family flees Germany to go to Poland after the Nazis' rise. Okay, can you recall of what year it was when they fled? Was it after the Night of Long Knives, or?
Oh no! I think it was more like Kristallnacht. It was around Kristallnacht.
Yeah, which makes sense. But then in Poland, of course, we know history. The Nazis invade Poland, so the parents take the children and say, just go to the Soviet Union.
There's actually a funny line with that, where Salomon remarks, I was glad Nazis invaded Poland because the police would forget about that bicycle accident.
Yeah, because he's a bit of a troublemaker in the Polish town he lives in. But he goes to the Soviet Union and becomes a commissar, which is in essence the Stalinist youth. Young pioneer. I think is a rough equivalent. Yeah, it's something of it's kind of vague. Stalinism's interesting, but then the Nazis attack Russia, so now he has to be folded. Now he has to act like he's German again to be accepted by the advancing Nazi army, and then after like a series of like really unbelievable circumstances, he's sent back to Germany as a Hitler youth, and he has to hide his Jewishness, which is where the penis action in this movie comes from.
Yes.
Boy. Because, of course, he's a Jew, he's circumcised, and he has to hide that. Yeah.
Which is why the opening scene is so strange, because it's a circumcision ceremony. And then you're like, and then as you watch the film, it's like, why the fuck is this here? And then you get further down, There's also a scene when he was with the Wehrmacht with his actor friend, discovering that he's circumcised, and then he's like, "Oh shit!"
A gay actor friend, which is also another ruffle. I think it must be known that like this movie like has the detail of Solomon attempting to hide he's circumcised by trying like to pull up the skin of his penis up over, so we can hide the fact that he has no foreskin, and like. That's like shown in. It's not like there's not necessarily like a close up of it, but like that it's talked about in enough detail that
I think you do get a brief shot of it too.
There is a shot of it. It's very quick, but there is a shot of it.
Yeah,
and, like, details like that sort of fill the movie, and sort of it makes something, because in some way this is a very silly movie, and just how many times this kid goes over like enemy lines, and how many times he has to flee, and how many people he meets.
Yeah,
but like more graphic details like that actually make it fairly believable, which is really interesting. But Rhea, I think we're kind of beating around the bush. What'd you think of it?
You know, I thought it had a really good sense of payoff, especially with the circumcision circumcision subplot, and like also like Solomon as an actor. So very early on, he's like, "Oh, I want to be an actor." You know, this is when he was living in Lotz, and then he meets this meets the actor in the Wehrmacht, and there's like a pinnacle moment of like, "Hey, you're an actor. How easy is it to act?" And then the actor says that it's easier than being yourself, and that really sort of kicks off for the rest of the whole film, where Solomon has to survive by being someone else, mainly being a translator, which he actually is, versus a Hitler Youth member, which definitely not, and he's very not okay with it
for obvious reasons. The interesting thing about this movie, and this is when we watched it in my class, this is something we sort of thought about, is that how much this movie just seems uninterested in national identities, and how easily Solomon can just shed like first being German, then being Polish, then being the Stalinist youth, then being German again, and all along the way, the only thing that defines him is that he is Jewish. It is the one thing he cannot shed. And in fact, that scene where like he tries to hide his like circumcision, like that ends up being a failure. He can't, even if he tries, hide the fact that he's Jewish. It is the only real mark that makes him.
Right, because that
which actually I think has really interesting parallels to certain like forms of sort of Jewish thought, especially before sort of in like the proto-Zionist period, where like people would talk, there'd be philosophers would say like, oh, Judaism is superior to cultures such as Christianity or Islam because Judaism does not need a state to survive. It does not need a state to differentiate itself. It can retain itself without the safety of an army. And this movie doesn't quite engage with that, but like that idea of Judaism being a unique mark that comes up above national identity, I think that's a really interesting thing about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would agree too. Although I think it doesn't really go too deep and sort of like more like back to like Jewish. I don't know. I had a hard time wrestling with some of like the with like some of the beats of like the retention of like being being Jewish and essentially going back and forth between all these various different identities. One of the things I noticed is that there's a moment when Isaac and Solomon get ready to leave Lotz, and then they eventually get separated. Well, fuck. And in that scene, there's like a discussion of like a sense of duty, but it's like totally conflicted, where it's like you never leave home in a time of crisis versus obeying your parents. But I feel like that's, I mean, maybe it's not supposed to be to go through for the rest of the film, but I felt like it was just dropped.
Yeah, well, it's a movie juggling a lot. Isn't this movie only like 2 hours?
Yeah, it's juggling a lot, and like I feel like you definitely get.
This movie is showing us the entirety of World War II, and pretty much like the entirety of the Eastern Front in 2 hours, and some things are just going to be dropped. But I think what it drops those sort of things for is just wildly interesting, and like at a certain point, this movie just kind of becomes like World War II variety hour, as you just kind of jump from like different ideologies and different people to another, and like all of them have like something very different to say about the war, and like in some ways it's a coming of age story, but like a very strange one.
Right. Yeah.
Because like most of the people he meets ends up being destroyed in some way or another.
Right, and then not to mention all of the scenes, especially with the weird ballet of Stalin and Hitler doing a ballet.
Oh, that's I love that scene.
Of Stalin just exploding, and then there's also an instant of it's like a dream that Solomon has, and then it ends up him hiding inside of a closet next to Hitler.
Yeah, there's like, I think the movie's not quite dreamlike, but those are like dreamlike sequences.
Right.
Those literal dream sequences kind of show. They're a rare kind of dream sequence, because oftentimes dream sequences in movies are like all about sort of literalizing things in the subtext. Whereas in here, you get the feeling like, man, these just feel like Solomon's dreams. This feels like the sort of thing like a 12-year-old boy would dream. What, he's like 14 in the movie, isn't he?
Yeah, 14 or 15.
This feels like the sort of thing a 14-year-old boy during World War II would dream of. Is a ballet with Hitler and Stalin.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's an odd sort of. In some ways, it's rather melodramatic.
Yeah.
Because like there are like scenes of like him talking to that Hitler youth girl, and her saying like, if you're a Jew, I'd shoot you. There's like very sort of over the top moments, but there's also just things like but there's also sort of like moments of I think again like Solomon trying to hide his circumcised penis. Those just like doses of reality that kind of make it a very interesting, very engaging balancing act.
Yeah. There was also a very interesting sort of reality check for Solomon at the very end. But he learns that Hitler wasn't sending all of the Jews to Madagascar. He was ordering them to be killed.
Yeah. It's not a Holocaust movie, I don't think. Not really.
It's more a movie about... I mean, it's definitely a movie about Solomon.
Yeah. Well, it's a movie about identities.
The real life man. Yes, that's also
about. It's about sort of like taking sort of constructions we deem as ingrained and sort of showing them as how silly they are. I think it must be known that Solomon's actually not that great at like hiding his identities and
really
gripping himself. But yet he manages to be convincing. Just through like basic skills such as knowing German or knowing Russian.
Yes.
And it kind of just shows like, and it's also just like a very silly. It also just makes a mockery of the Nazis. I think there's no like more like distinct demolition of Nazi ideology than the idea of a Jewish boy successfully pretending he's a Hitler Youth for most of the war. Yeah.
And not to mention, a lot of these Nazis are goofy.
Oh yeah, they're goofy. Like that's another thing where like it's goofy in like a very peculiar way, where you're both not sure whether to laugh at them or be scared of them, because like in some ways like these are like our quote unquote villains. Like if Solomon fucks up, he's dead.
Right. Yeah.
But it's also like they're also just terrible at being villains. So
yeah.
Which is really interesting. I think that also kind of leads into a scene where like there's a scene at a point where I think it's a scene where like they're in like a little weapons factory, and like they hear over the radio that the Nazis have lost at Stalingrad, and they start singing "Deutschland, Deutschland über alles."
Yes,
and you sort of get a sense of how just sort of deeply wanting for identity, deeply wanting for place that Solomon is. And sort of like in the same way that it's sort of like it shows like how easy it is to strip these identities, it also shows very much why we have these identities and why these constructions exist, because they're very comfortable, they're very appealing.
Yes.
And that is like this brief moment of comradeship, even by people who want him dead, who literally want him dead. That's something really interesting, and I do like how like I don't think the movie really gives like a final thesis. I don't think it needed to.
I mean, yeah.
I think it's okay.
Hey, I'm hesitant about giving my own children a circumcision after this whole experience, but
yeah. Of like literally, do I want to literally scar my children of an identity?
Right. Yeah.
Which is a conversation which here in America it's kind of weird about because like everyone gets circumcised, but that's beyond the point really. It's a very European movie. It's made by a Polish director whose mother was once part of the Polish resistance and has worked with Kieślowski. So its context is rigorously European. And I think it's very interesting for that.
Yes.
I really love this movie. I kind of hear you're more lukewarm on it.
Yeah. I feel like it's struggling with a lot, but not coming to a whole lot of consensus. And I suppose it's fine, but it's just...
I think it's sort of biographical nature of it. It kind of allows it to like ask a lot of questions and just kind of leave it at that. Because like the crux of the film is kind of like seeing your character grow. And Solomon does grow in some way.
Some way, yeah.
So like I think it's a very entertaining movie. Actually, I think it's mawkishly funny, and like it has its absurdity. It can often be fun. So like I think it's actually like I don't think it's quite like Schindler's List in sort of watching experience. This isn't a movie where like it shows us horrible things happening and makes you sort of like reminisce. It just kind of shows you this boy's life and just has you like think about what's going on here. But we're also going to have like a woman orgasm by screaming Heil Hitler.
I was reading about that on the Wikipedia page.
Yeah, that is every bit as goofy as you might think it is.
Yes.
So, yeah, Tyler, does any of this sound interesting to you?
It really does. I should really see this movie. It sounds pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I want to go more into the director's filmography because, of course, like I've already said, she's worked with Kieślowski. She has a really interesting life.
Yeah. Although I will say the special effects. Oh boy. I feel like that. Like they seem very real, and like it's an old enough movie to where they probably are real.
Wait, well, the movie feels older than it actually is, to be honest.
Right? Yeah. Which
is a strange thing. Like you think, like, oh, this is an '80s movie, but it's made in 1990. So it is what it is. Tyler, I think you'd actually really enjoy it.
It sounds like I would. This sounds really like something I'd be very, very interested in.
Yeah, it's kind of a perfect mix of something both like weird and mawkish, but also like really funny and entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
I'm
Reed,
here for that.
I've sort of exhausted what I could say. Do you have any more things to say, Reed?
Although I did have a question about this movie, especially during the Stalingrad announcement.
Mm-hmm.
Would they even do that?
Do the what?
Like even announce that they lost? Because wouldn't that be
that did. If I am not mistaken, that there was actually I have actually heard the recording of like the Nazi government announcing we have lost in Stalingrad, like Nazi soldiers. There's actually like some really interesting literature about like apparently like there was like a little girl who once asked their mother like who once wrote to someone and said like will the soldiers all have enough time to kill themselves before the communists come? and things like that. So yeah, and also like the German people knew they were losing because they had the very real fact of bombers heading overhead and artillery if you lived in the east. So the Germans were actually not outside of issues of the Holocaust and other issues. So yes, I think you probably would have heard that. Yes, we've lost in Stalingrad.
Yes.
So that just a quick question. I apologize for that digression, but I think that is accurate.
Okay. Yeah. And then probably one last thing is that the depiction of Nazis it's a bit strange. Maybe.
Well, I mean, strange insofar as that like Nazis as goofy villains is sort of just a strange mold for us.
Well, I mean, not just that, but how there is a line in here on how like the war, World War II, whatnot, was rather a holy war against Jews. Sort of that like framing.
Yeah, Timothy Snyder would regard it as like as a colonist war.
A war of colonization. And I would agree more with
Germany wanted to spread east and colonize Europe in the same way that, say, England had colonized Africa or India.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, sort of. I don't think there's. I can't quite remember anything in the movie where I'd say like, wait a minute, the Nazis wouldn't do that.
No, so, they absolutely would slaughter tens of thousands and millions, and they did.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there is a conversation to be had about like portraying your like Nazis as like goofy, sort of incoherent villains, but I'd argue that's actually kind of historically accurate.
Yeah, and I'm not bashing it because I think that sort of makes them more complex.
Yeah,
it makes talk about them more interesting, and then sort of like they're evil, but there's also a strange sense that they're also human.
Yeah, well, I think portraying them I think portraying them differently, I think just would have stole it of its punch, because I think the Nazis as like absurd, just these absurd people is kind of the point, and I like that.
Yes.
So is that sort of all you have left?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Alrighty. So where the fuck do we want to go next?
I think this would be an apt time to transition into some Tarkovsky here.
I think that's where I was leaning. Okay.
I'll just follow this up, and we'll see how much I actually have to talk about. But it's interesting because Tarkovsky's first movie, which I haven't seen but now really want to, is a movie called Ivan's Childhood, which centers on a Soviet 12-year-old boy, I believe, during World War II, and kind of his experiences like with the war. And I think a lot of it like takes place on the front. So sort of similarly dealing with that idea of like youth in that time and how, how it affected that generation and the people living through it, but kind of on a different side of the conflict.
There's like in the Soviet Union, I think, Reed, isn't it true that they lost like in total around like 50,000 or like 20,000 people? Or 20 million people during World War II?
Yeah, it's around 20 million. It was a fuck ton, yes.
Yeah, like
around 20, 30 million.
Like one of the common things of like of Soviet culture is how like women were like kind of strapped for men because the men died in the war.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had a man, it didn't matter what kind of man you had, you were at least married, and that's better than a lot of women.
Oh, that's interesting. That doesn't really play directly into any of these movies, but something sort of like that sort of comes up in Stalker, which is interesting.
Like sort of a lost I think Lost Generation is something we sort of ascribe to World War I, but I think that's certainly something you could describe the post World War II Soviet era with.
Yeah. But anyway, so this past weekend I saw the three filmic pillars by Andrei Tarkovsky, who is kind of regarded as the like the ultimate Soviet filmmaker.
Yeah,
he
I think
works
like if you bring up like Russian filmmakers, he's other than like the early like Soviet experimentalists, he's I think he's like top of the food chain.
Oh yeah, it's like him and Eisenstein. That's like the top. So I had, if you recall, I had earlier seen his last movie, which is called The Sacrifice, and
you found it deeply weird.
It was very strange and very opaque and very frustrating. Like, one of the most frustrating experiences I've had with any movie, really. Like, aside from the fact that the visuals looked like they were bestowed upon this earth by the god of light himself. That movie was shot by Sven Nykvist, who is maybe my all-time cinematography hero. But regardless, that movie was just a very, very strange and unpleasant experience for me. So going into the first of these, which was his second film, Andrei Rublev, I was a little trepidatious. But I gotta say, Andrei Rublev is an extraordinary movie. Like, the movie centers around the life of this sort of well-known Russian icon painter named Andrei Rublev. It takes place during the 14th century, I want to say. Maybe the 15th century. I think 15th century.
I want to say it was the 15th century Russian icon painter.
Yeah, so solidly during the Middle Ages. It's like he is, the protagonist and, the center around which the movie orbits, but the movie doesn't really concern itself with like his life so much as it concerns itself with like exploring a lot of different themes and ideas and aspects of kind of medieval Russia and delving into a lot of themes and issues. And it's really pretty incredible, but because it does all that while still being very human. Like, it is really like one of the most like humanistic movies I think I've ever seen. And really what this weekend taught me more than anything is that like Tarkovsky is really interested in, or was at a certain point, because Stalker is kind of different and, well, no, Stalker's kind of similar. Actually, Tarkovsky is really interested in like plumbing human emotions and the human psyche, and really exploring that kind of above all else. But like Andrei Rublev is like this big, sprawling historical epic that has like an hour-long sequence where they're constructing a bell, and like you follow that whole process while Andrei kind of weaves in and out of the proceedings. And like, I don't want to spoil it, but like there's something he does, the way he frames that bell-making sequence with a character who is just introduced at the beginning of it. And this is at like the very end of the movie. You're introduced to this character, you follow him while the characters you've been following the entire film just kind of weave in and out. And he makes you get so deeply invested in this storyline. It's really just incredible. Like, and that to me was just like the capper on top of everything else with this movie. Like, it plumbs into like the idea of religion, the idea of like and the role of the church and like ideas about religion. Like, there's a long kind of scene where Andrei is talking about his ideas about the Passion and the crucifixion, and you see like a recreation of it that's like very non-traditional. Like, it's in the snow, and like all of kind of Jesus's like friends and disciples are all like crowded around him as he's being crucified. It's really, really well done. And then they talk about like the idea of like making art under an oppressive regime. There's a sequence where these builders who have just like constructed a temple or something for the Grand Prince. The Grand Prince isn't happy with it and he wants them to redo it, but they're like, oh, we have another job. It's for your brother. We're going to leave and go do that. And then as they're traveling on the road to his brother's job, he has his soldiers go and attack them and gouge their eyes out so that they can't recreate their work. And like, the movie is just chock full of just incredible, like, well-observed moments like that. Like, it's composed of just a bunch of separate incidents that kind of form their own sort of self-contained sequences in the film, almost like I was talking about with Mad Men, like plot threads and things like carry over, but each sequence is kind of concerned with its own themes and ideas and happenings. And it's beautifully shot. It's beautifully acted. It's really just extraordinary. And like, going into it, I would have like said like I am not a fan of Tarkovsky, but this film, just the more I think about it, the more I really do admire it. And I would recommend everybody go see it, except it's 3 hours long, so I know very few people will do it.
I want to watch it right now. This sounds like everything I could ever love.
I mean, it is very methodically paced, and it is slow, and it has its lulls, but I think the totality of it is something that really cannot be denied. So,
is it something of like, is it concerned really with his art, or is it much concerned with questions of just sort of art in a more vague, sort of ethereal sense?
Mainly that, although there is like a montage of his artworks at the end of the film, and you do kind of see him painting at times, but it's not really concerned with like him and his craft necessarily.
Interesting.
Which is, I think works very well for the movie. It uses him as a conduit to explore a lot of bigger issues. So
yeah, because like, the icons he painted kind of came to represent Russian art at large.
Mm.
Yeah, like when we think of Russia, we kind of often think of these Orthodox icons.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of talk about kind of different styles of art and different how they feel about kind of icon painting and about art in general and the purpose of artistry and all that stuff. So definitely factors into it. So
another quick little thing, if you're interested in sort of like similar themes, I'd recommend, it's a Ukrainian film, but also of course under the Soviet umbrella, called Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. It's only like 90 minutes, but it's like this weird sort of abstract sort of experience of the medieval Russia. Sort of Eastern Europe is weird, different. See, I guess like it would have been the Kievan Rus at this time.
Yeah.
But yeah, sort of like it's this like wildly directed, sort of wildly stylized vision of sort of the medieval Slavic world.
That's interesting.
And if you're interested in that, I'd highly recommend it.
Okay. Oh, that was done actually. It seems that was done by the same director who did The Color of Pomegranates, which is a movie that is brought up a lot. I think that's him.
Color of Pomegranates.
Maybe not. Oh no, I'm completely wrong. I'm completely wrong about that. My bad.
Don't worry about it.
His name just looked sort of similar. Anyway, well, Color of Pomegranates is just something that people tend to bring up a lot. Oh no, it was the same guy. Okay, I'm not crazy.
Well, we got Color of Pomegranate. Yeah, I have not seen Color of Pomegranates.
That's one that like people like Scorsese bring up very, very frequently. I've heard it's just like it's a very strange kind of experimental, abstract sort of thing.
Yeah, Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors is in somewhat of the same mold.
Okay, that's interesting.
And I remember it being just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. So after Andrei Rublev, the next night I went back and I saw his 1972 film Solaris, which is one of his more well-known works. It was remade by Steven Soderbergh in the 2000s. This movie, each time I went into one of these movies, I was feeling sort of apprehensive just because I was concerned that I wouldn't like it or that I'd be bored.
All 3 hours long.
They're all 3 hours long, and yeah, it's just, Russian Tarkovsky. Like, these are all buzzwords for, hard to get through, like, difficult films.
It's art house bingo, and everyone's kind of scared of art house bingo.
Exactly. But Solaris, I mean, I liked it less, but I still liked it quite a bit. The beginning is a little dull and takes some time to get going, and then it sort of lost me at the end, although it does bring it home in a pretty compelling way. But the middle of this movie is this really compelling, like, meditation on, like, memory and like humanity and like the idea of how we remember our loved ones. Like the conceit of this is that this psychologist goes to investigate this space station that's orbiting a planet called Solaris that has been sending like very strange transmissions. Like there's only 3 crew members left up there. And he goes and he finds it like just in total shambles. Like one of the crew members is dead. The other 2 are kind of cagey about what's going on. And then he starts to be visited by like reincarnations of his dead wife that were like created by the planet. And like there's this big thing about how like the ocean is like a living like cerebral being or something. It's all kind of like not totally clear, as you would imagine it wouldn't be if this were, you know, a real scenario. But like it's just this long, slow like meditation on a lot of these themes and ideas, and I was really, really entranced by it just because like I think the thing with the sacrifice is that movie is like kind of so willfully opaque in a lot of ways, and just kind of cagey about like what's actually happening and what you're supposed to take away. And like also like the themes of that movie, it feels less like humanistic to me. And like somehow I'm not totally sure why. I think just the themes it's exploring are maybe less emotional and more cerebral. Like I think the thing with Andrei Rublev and Solaris in particular is that what they're dealing with is such like an interesting blend of like the cerebral and the emotional, which he pulls off really well. And yeah, I was really taken in by it. It's got like great production design. Again, like very, very well acted. Yeah, Solaris I really enjoyed like much more than I kind of expected.
Yeah, I think quick thing I've noticed, sort of just looking at it, I can't think of too many other Soviet films that used foreign shooting locations. Like some of this movie was shot in Tokyo.
Oh yeah. There's a scene. Well, this is one of those stereotypical Tarkovsky things. There's like a 5-minute scene of just like this guy driving through a futuristic city, and it's just Tokyo. I don't know.
I don't know where that lies in conversations about like Asia equals the future, like, but
yeah, I don't know.
I think that's interesting because I haven't quite come across that in Soviet film.
It's odd and it's oddly placed, but. Yeah, I really don't know what to make of that sequence, to be quite honest. I sort of zoned out a little bit during it, but I don't know. And also I'm not like super well versed in, you know, the history of the Soviet film industry, so I don't know too much about what that would have entailed. But
yeah, but this was made in what, 72, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, it's during the 60s that like the Khrushchev fall is happening, and the Soviets are starting to run away from that from Stalinist film, that sort of like harsh Soviet realism.
Yeah. So
this is a period when like where the question of what is Soviet film is being routinely asked. Mm-hmm. And is something that's being sort of and somebody like Tarkovsky is sort of at the forefront of what quote unquote Soviet film could be.
Yeah.
And how he was no longer allowed to make Soviet film because of it.
You're right. Yeah, the Soviet Union took great issue with several of his films, although Solaris was not one of them. It was I think it was allowed to play in competition at Cannes, which many of his films were not.
What was the last film he made in the Soviet Union?
Oh, I'm about to talk about it. It's Stalker.
Ooh, that's what I thought.
So now, by the time I got around to Stalker, so I saw these movies like 1, 2, 3 in a row. They were screening one night after another at the rec theater that I like to frequent.
That sounds mildly exhausting.
Well, it kind of was, because by the time Stalker rolled around, and I was kind of looking forward to it because I'd heard a lot about it and it sounded really interesting. This was definitely my least favorite of the 3.
Okay.
Because it's weird. It starts off pretty strong. It concerns this man named, or none of the characters really have names. This man called the Stalker, who what he does is he takes people into this kind of mysterious area called the Zone, which just kind of behaves sort of strongly. It's actually, if you saw Annihilation, this is where I imagine Alex Garland got a lot of that movie from. It's sort of a similar setup. They're venturing into this strange sci-fi inflected part of the landscape. They're trying to get to this place known as the Room, which supposedly will fulfill your deepest desire. He takes these two characters who are a writer and a professor into the Zone, and most of the movie's running time is devoted to their kind of journey, their meandering journey through the Zone, trying to get to this mysterious room. And I gotta be honest, you based upon this setup, you would imagine that, like, you know, as they go deeper into the Zone, they venture deeper into themselves and explore their psyches, you know, more deeply and deal with deeper personal issues and whatnot. It doesn't really do that. So I was a little disappointed by that. And also I was kind of seeing it at the end of a long day, and I was a little bit tired, and it was hypnotic in a way that I was kind of drifting in and out at points. Just because, like, it is a beautiful movie. Like, the look of it is really incredible. The scenes outside the Zone are shot in this, like, sepia, this high contrast sepia look, and then when they're in the Zone, it's in color, and there's a lot of, the use of green is really incredible. There's some great, like, high contrast shadows and just incredible cinematography. It's just that, like, I don't know, the story, and, like, it feels like he's not delving as deeply into these themes as he could be, which is a little odd to me. I don't know. It's more just like kind of a meandering journey. And then, now what I will say is that by the time they get to the end, they get to the Room. There's this whole kind of thing that happens where, like, they end up not going inside for various reasons. And then there's more scenes of them after they've left the Zone. And the Stalker is kind of has this, like, monologue about how, I forget exactly, like, what it is. Like, he talks about how, like, I'm trying to remember. He talks about how, like he leads people into the Zone. Like, it's his livelihood. Like, this is how he makes a living, and nobody, like, understands that. And, like, he talks about, like, the nature of despair, and then his wife has this, like, long monologue, like, straight to the camera about, like, why she married him, and, like, how she knew that, like, their life would be hard, but she figures that, like, being married, she's better off than she would have been otherwise. And I don't know.
Which is very Soviet.
Right, exactly. And I don't know. There's also this interesting thing where they talk about, like, what the Room actually does, and, like, does it fulfill, like, what you actually want, or does it fulfill, like, your unconscious desires? Like, there's this thing about how, like, there was a former stalker who, like, went inside and then ended up committing suicide later. So there is, like, a lot of compelling stuff weaved into this movie. It's way more fun to think about than it is to watch. And it plays with a lot of themes and ideas, again, that are just, like, very compelling. But for whatever reason, I was just way less involved in this one. I think because a lot of the kind of the Tarkovskyan, like, cerebral discussion of big abstract ideas is kind of confined to the end of the movie. And I saw this one. This was the only one I saw with anyone else. I went to the first two alone, but then I saw this one with a couple of my friends. And one of my friends had an interesting observation, which is that, like, the people who he's leading into the Zone are, like, these academics who are trying to, like, find some sort of fulfillment or understanding. And you can read the movie as, like, a metaphor for, like, how artists and intellectuals try to understand despair, but they really can't. Or they try to use despair to kind of, like, provide meaning, but like when you're experiencing despair, there is no meaning in it. It's just despair, which is again a wildly compelling idea. The movie is like it doesn't engage with that as much as I would have liked. I think because maybe more the point of this movie was for you to kind of read your own meaning into it more so than the other two, which has merit in and of itself, but I tend to find that a little bit less compelling when the filmmaker's just like, oh, here's this grand abstract thing, read whatever you want into it. I don't know. I feel like
I can't say I have that much patience for that either.
To me, that just kind of feels like I don't know, an easy way of like dodging making a statement. I don't know. That's just the way I feel. But you know, I feel like I have a much deeper appreciation for Tarkovsky now, and like I said, I think I'm finding that I prefer his early work to his later work in a lot of ways. Like I think it based on what I've seen, it feels like he was more interested in like more directly engaging with themes earlier in his career and more interested in kind of actually kind of discussing and debating ideas more so than just kind of throwing them all up on the screen and letting you draw your own conclusions. So I don't know. This was definitely a very interesting and worthwhile experience for me. So it was a very compelling way, I thought, to kind of broaden my film watching horizons.
Okay. So, you know, honestly, like, at least two of these I'm now very interested in seeing.
Yeah.
And also, like, Nostalgia, his first film outside of Russia, that's the one with, like, that long-ass shot of a man holding a candle, correct?
I'm not sure, but that sounds accurate.
Yeah, so... pretty much the only thing keeping me from Tarkovsky is the length, because I'm not made of time.
Yeah, no, they're quite low. Well, Nostalgia's only 2 hours. Ivan's Childhood is like 90 minutes. So maybe those would be good places to start. I don't know.
Definitely.
But yeah, you know, I would recommend checking it out because he is really a very singular voice in film, and I find him fascinating, if nothing else.
Okay, then, yeah. I'm particularly interested in Andrei Rublev because I've been thinking a lot about sort of Russian Orthodoxy lately.
It will definitely scratch that itch.
Okay, perfect. So, oh shit, I have to talk about what I'm talking about.
And now, the hardest of left turns. I think the best way to
car over.
The best way to find a transition into this is just to say we have no transition.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So, My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Now,
can I ask?
Literally the hardest of left tones because
I
don't know how. Oh, sure, Reed.
What drove you to seek out this fine piece of entertainment?
Spending too much time on the internet and morbid curiosity.
All right, that's fair.
Because I think we have literally gone from Soviet contemplative Soviet film to a franchise whose start was we need to sell toys. And I don't know how you have more of a divide in the filmic world than that. This is all the same medium.
You want to talk about art versus commerce, like?
Yeah. Holy shit. But, now, the reason I ventured down this rabbit hole is because I wanted to try and sort of delve into why adults watch children's media. Mm-hmm. Which is something that interests me. And also, like, there's a lot of stories to be told about whom we design film for, and what, like, targeted audiences are, and especially, like, when you're dealing with, like, sort of, like, cable or network television, intended audience is kind of everything. Like, you can't sell a show without sort of this idea of who will be watching it.
Mm.
Right.
Like, I mean, like, we have, like, a whole series of films. Like, I think a good example right now is that, like, with Tyler Perry, you are routinely aware that the target audience is African American.
Right.
But it also but it also doesn't make much comment about the African American condition. But in regards to My Little Pony, the show that like is where all this, I don't know whether to call it controversy or just intrigue, started in 2010. And here, let me pull up the name real quick. Time to destroy my history. Now, the creator of the show is Lauren Faust. She had done some things she'd been in the animation industry for a while. She had done some stuff for Cartoon Network earlier, including Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, the Powerpuff Girls, that sort of thing. I think right now, what is she working on right now? So she's working on there's a DC Comics thing she's working on and so forth. So she's been around, and I remember reading something that when this show first came out, some of its critics said oh, this is Faust moving backwards from something like Foster's Friends and moving towards something safer, and also this is just a safer direction for Cartoon Network because of course My Little Pony has been around. The toy's been around since the 80s. Is that right?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course because I grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, that the theme song is ingrained in my brain from watching Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network. So this thing has been around, but sort of 2010 was kind of the point where it stopped being about the toys and more about the show in question, which I think is unique. But why I'm here is because at a certain point, people realized that the people watching the show weren't all little girls. It was a series of 20-year-old men.
Mm-hmm.
And what it sort of and the fandom created around this show is deeply fascinating. Because it's a story about how we gender shows as well, and how to say when women find more masculine things, say if you I think Mad Max is is a franchise that's as geared to male sensibilities as you can imagine. But if you're a female and you say I love these movies, these are my favorite things, we don't think that's very weird. Mm-hmm. But for a series of adult men to say I really throws off that is deeply weird to us. I think just partially about how we market and how we gender things and how we often view female-centric culture and female-centric television or media in general as detritus just by the fact that it is female-centric.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of My Little Pony, I wouldn't call it detritus. Now, the show is kind of what you'd expect from a Cartoon Network show, from a Cartoon Network girls show. It's about this ultra colorful fantasy realm full of colorful, literally colorful and figuratively colorful characters who kind of stride that difference between sort of archetype and sort of 2.5D characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing that I think the internet is kind of people are kind of fascinated with things that are both easy to understand and easy to identify, but also have some just a little bit of depth to them.
Yeah.
But I could see this scratching that itch for some kind of person. Not quite for me, but so I am. But it's all about people getting to colorful, quasi self-aware, but also really sincere adventures about friendship and learning lessons and so forth. And it's actually really pretty. It's really well animated. I like all the color work. I like the design of the fantasy realm. I think the character designs are properly expressive. They're kind of anime in certain ways of the giant dollish eyes and so forth. I think there's something to be read into that. I'm not qualified to do that. But I don't think the show really matters as much here. I think it's more what developed around it. And the fandom that was created around it is one that's unique, partially because it seems to relish in the fact that it's celebrating something it shouldn't they aren't quote unquote allowed to celebrate. Like the fact that it's something for girls that they love, that's almost like a celebratory point. And how like apparently this fandom is a bit more inclusive than many others going on, and a bit more supportive. Like there's a story I read of like, I think there was like a middle schooler who wore like a Rainbow Dash backpack to school and was bullied for it. And apparently the fandom went in and tried to and went in to support him and things of that sort. So apparently it's actually a really supportive and really welcoming environment to be in the quote unquote brony community. And I think this does, like, I think this show allows us to tell stories about gender. I think it must be known that I think there's only one male character who speaks in this show, at least in like the couple of episodes I watched.
Okay.
Everyone else is female. I think calling it a matriarchy is accurate.
Okay.
And I can't name too many other matriarchies on screen other than fucking like Mad Max Fury Road. Like, can you think of any can you think of other matriarchies on screen?
I'd be hard pressed.
Yeah. So like,
no.
It has that, and also I think female-centric fantasy isn't an itch that's scratched very often.
Yeah, that's kind of true. Yeah.
Because like when you think of like high fantasy, it's almost always like male. In fact, like fantasy and sci-fi have often been derided for misogynist fan bases and for misogynist media.
Yeah.
So to have something like this, which is, I mean, and like to be certain, like I'm not going to say that like the ponies voiced by women in the show are necessarily like nuanced and three-dimensional characters, but I don't think any of them are necessarily stereotypes, and I don't think really any of them are necessarily characterized as women.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's a female director, it's a female creator as well. Mm-hmm. So I think the fact that like a male audience is celebrating that, I think that's a positive thing. I think like something like this is kind of helping to break down that sort of gender divide we have in television, particularly children's television, because especially since the 80s, we have rigorously gendered things for children. I mean, that's part of why like video games are such like a masculine like field nightmare now, is because like when Nintendo had to sell like the video game console as a toy, you had to choose whether it be a boys thing or a girls thing, and they chose boys.
Right.
Yeah.
So like I think things like, whilst I don't think it's a very exciting show or something I'd necessarily watch, and I can't quite say I understand why a bunch of 20-year-old men are like develop like this super intricate fan base around it. Mm-hmm. But I think the world might be better for it. I think so. But the sort of venture forth from that, I watched two other shows for this exercise. My Little Pony was going to be the focus of it. Oh, excuse me, because like the cultural melange around it is just really fascinating.
Yeah.
But the other two shows I watched were Adventure Time and Steven Universe. Have either of you seen these two shows?
I've seen some of Adventure Time and none of Steven Universe.
Yeah, okay. Same.
Now, the thing about this was, like, because most of my focus was on My Little Pony, I didn't watch, like, that much of these shows. Like, I watched 2 episodes of each. The problem is each episode is, like, 12 minutes in, like, SpongeBob fashion. So I technically only watched, like, 24 minutes of each particular show. So I don't have that big a pool for this. But I think, in speaking of gender, like Steven Universe is kind of something that comes up a lot, because if I'm not mistaken, aren't the gem characters are all lesbians? Or am I mistaken?
I have no idea, honestly.
I think this is important, and I don't want to fuck this up.
Okay.
Oh dear, how do you Google our cartoon characters gay without like opening up like a nightmarish realm? Okay, I'm not gonna be able to get specific here, but like a lot of like the show concerns LGBTQ plus characters, and like there's like non-conventional, like there's representations of non-binary. There was like, I think it was big concern that like Steven himself is like a pudgy sort of like fat figure of which the sort of like main of a cartoon show really usually doesn't revolve around. It's usually a character like that is usually always the butt of the joke, not really the main.
Right.
I think it also like other body types are I think they're like two of like the main gems. One of which is like very sort of straight-lipped, sort of like coated African American woman. Whilst the other is like is a bigger sort of like kind of like rounded something sort of like traditional sort of African American female sort of body type, which is something I really can't say I've seen in a kids show before, at least not in America. So it's like very positive on that front. The show's also really good.
Oh.
It's like it's really funny. It's not. It has like a very nice kind of like relaxed atmosphere that's really engaging. It's. I think its characters are all like twinged with like they all kind of have that like 2.5D mentality of like it's very easy just to kind of look at them for a few seconds and say I know this, but there's just enough depth and just enough layers to them that they become like really compelling. Like I really like Steven's father, this kind of like overweight, sort of lost kind of like quote unquote loser father who's also just like really laid back, but also like not a negative father figure. And like how like the background of the show is kind of like Steven. There's some like weird mythology stuff, but pretty much like Steven's mother was lost in childbirth. And I can't really think of that in too many kids shows. I mean, like the dead mother is a thing, but something that particular really isn't. But
yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. So like there's some really interesting things that sort of about gender in this. Like I haven't watched enough of it to make like really conclusions about that. And there is also like a horrifying amount of the internet that kind of like regales against the show for like its representation of these things, which is horrifying. And I think it's a negative thing that like the show became something of a lightning rod for like bad things in kid show, because I think it's really charming and really good, and I'd actually recommend it. And I think in this case, I think I'm completely fine with adults watching the show and like enjoying it and being fans of it, because I think there is a maturity to it. Yeah. I don't think it's infantile. I don't think it's something just like you get high and like look at the pretty colors or something like that. I think this show, I can see exactly why this show would resonate with adults, especially like if you're in the LGBTQ community. And like to see like a sort of a quote unquote high concept like fantasy thriller based on sort of like your struggles, I can't help but support that. So hey, I'd highly recommend that. Okay. What I wouldn't highly recommend is Adventure Time.
Okay. And we're back.
We're back. I wanted to say this a lot because this is the one I have the least to say about, because it's the least ambitious of any of them. Because I think it must be known, like coming off of My Little Pony and watching this, you sort of get the sense of like all Jake the dog seems to say is bro, and like Finn seems to be coded as like every like 12 to 14-year-old edgelord you could find in your middle school. And that's not necessarily bad, but I was coming off of like the hyper feminized like My Little Pony or the more sort of like gender neutral Steven Universe coming to this, I was like, oh, we're back. But the show's really weird.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing.
Okay. Well, it seems to be, based on what I've seen, and I've only seen kind of a handful of episodes, Adventure Time
I've seen very little as well.
Adventure Time seems to fall into that like category of like shows that just kind of like their humor is based very much in randomness and whatnot.
Yeah, the thing about that, and clearly I'm not against random humor because you see what I fucking watch on the internet all the time.
Right.
The thing about this show is like I just think it's just abrasive and loud and just annoying. It's like a child just screaming at you. And like I don't think the color scheme isn't very thought out. Like in one way I could say like, oh, it's very colorful and very charming, but it isn't. There's like lots of like just clashing colors and just a lot of it's abrasive to look at. Really, there's no shading whatsoever. Like everyone's got like these knoggly just teeth that like look like they come from like a 1920s rubber hose thing. And like, I just don't think it's very nice to look at, especially like the first episode I watched is about like bringing like candy people back to life, and there's like body horror in it, and in this art style, it's so weird to look at. It's also violent in a really that first episode was actually violent and really interesting. Like that episode has like a bunch of people whacking the shit out of zombies who were once their relatives, and then like Princess Bubblegum coming with a serum and pouring it on them, and they come back to life. So there's that, but like I think the second episode I saw of it, which was about going to the Lumpy Land. And the lumpy people just seem to be an excuse for the creators to make fun of teenage girls, and it's just not funny.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be one thing if it's random, but I just think it's just kind of lazy and hackneyed.
Interesting.
Like none of the jokes make any sense. None of the jokes make any sense, even from like a woo something crazy happens perspective.
Uh-huh.
And some jokes just go on like way too long. Like them making fun of like teenage girls happens for like half that fucking episode. It just seems like it never fucking ends. And like it feels like it's ad-libbed and like not in like a good way. It feels like a bunch of people struggling to come up with a plot and just coming up with the first thing they think of. And like and there are certain modes where this kind of like random woo anarchy anything can happen show could be entertaining, but I just don't think there's enough like care and craft taken into this show to make it really work.
Okay.
Because think about like I'm going to compare this to the Looney Tunes shorts for a little bit.
Okay.
Because the Looney Tunes short, because Adventure Time isn't really about anything. Apparently, there are episodes that are about certain things. Like apparently, there's an episode that deals with Alzheimer's. But most of the time, the show is mostly about nothing.
Yeah.
And that's okay because there's lots of things I love that are about nothing, like the Looney Tunes cartoons. Thing about it is, like, the Looney Tunes are always pulling from vaudeville and theater and Buster Keaton films and like. There is and Chuck Jones in particular would keep telling his animators and his writers, say like read things and don't only watch films. Go out and read history. Go read a book. Yeah. Go do things. Like it wasn't just them like just sitting in a room thinking, okay, what might be like a cool random thing to happen next. Mm-hmm. There is an art to stupid random humor. There is a craft, and Adventure Time just doesn't seem to get that. And what just happens is that I'm just annoyed by it, and I just want to shut it off. Is that an experience you had, Tyler, or
with Adventure Time?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, I certainly understand that, like, people who find it like strident, especially like one of the episodes that I've seen is the one where Justin Roiland voices that like lemon character.
Oh, yeah, Lemon Crab. Yeah,
who just like screams the whole time. I sort of appreciate like how absurdist it is.
I can see that. Like it is. I think some of like the imagery in this show is just so like off the wall that I'm almost glad I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, seeing Finn be threatened to death by fire by two giant sentient gumball machines. I can't say I'm not glad I've seen that.
Yeah, and a lot of like the world building and stuff I do kind of appreciate, but there's other parts of it, that are just kind of weird for the sake of being weird, and I'm not super on board with that. So it's not something I'd come back to very frequently. But I don't find it necessarily unpleasant.
Okay. I didn't find all of it unpleasant. Like, I did laugh sometimes. Like, I think sometimes it does something, like, really, like, quick and stupid, and it gets a laugh out of me. And I think the slapstick's all right. Like, I really do cherish the shot of, like, Finn falling, just falling through, they do like a thing with perspective at one point where like Finn's falling down like a long way, and where you think he's just gonna like land around a building somewhere, he just crashes right through and it fucks with your perspective, and I think that's really funny.
Yeah.
So like I'm not saying it's without craft or without care. I just don't think it has nearly enough to make it a success for what it's going for.
Yeah.
I think it's ill suit. I think it's just ill-timed, ill-mentioned anarchy. So I wasn't really that drawn to it, but again, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that adults are watching it. I think it's better for adults than it is for children. Because I think Movie Bob would describe like things like this are like they're not really kid show. They're shows for hipster parents that just happen to be acceptable for children.
Mm-hmm.
He also said that describing Steven Universe, but I actually don't think that really fits very well. I think Steven Universe kind of does is a kid show.
Yeah.
But regardless, that's what I've been watching, and I think I've come out with, maybe it's a good thing that adults are watching children's cartoons. Yeah, it's possible that I think it wouldn't be controversial to say that in some ways there's more boundaries being broken in the children's animation realm than there is in this, especially in the network television realm, and honestly, our big old-fashioned prestige pictures, especially when something like Game of Thrones is one of the biggest things in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say. I think the My Little Pony stuff I think was actually kind of revelatory because it really did make me think about sort of gender, and how it applies to shows and what we perceive as an acceptable audience for a show. And talking about that with Brenna was really interesting.
Yeah. But
I think I had a good time watching all of these,
okay.
In one way or another. Sometimes it was kind of a Schadenfreude thing, because I think at one point, Brenna was just watching Adventure Time, and she was just melting beside me, going, "What am I watching?" She also did that during My Little Pony, but I thought you're just being a baby. So that's what I've been watching, and I'm glad I did. And also, I might do more research on My Little Pony because, god damn it, that fan base is so fascinating.
I will. Maybe I should also, because it's something I just do not understand.
I don't understand it.
Mm.
I'm not going to say that. But I don't think but I think it doesn't matter if I understand it.
Okay.
Because I think there's one point I was watching a video essay by Dan Olson, who's a great YouTube creator, about 50 Shades of Grey, where he said it doesn't do us any good as critics to say it's impossible for someone to be turned on by 50 Shades of Grey.
Mm.
And I think it doesn't do us any good as critics to say, well, why? Oh my God, why would a 20-year-old man like My Little Pony?
Mm.
From my perspective, it happens, and we just need to analyze what that means.
Yeah.
Though I can't quite say I'd really recommend the show to you guys, per se, but, hey, if you want to do that research, I think you might find it rewarding.
Okay.
So, that's what I've been watching. And I thought it was really interesting. And I think more people should undergo this exercise, though a lot of the internet seems to be doing that already, because there's a billion think pieces about things like My Little Pony and Adventure Time, or especially Steven Universe. So hey, there we are.
Yeah, it seems interesting, if nothing else. Alrighty then. Well, that about wraps it up for this one. What are we going to do and talk about next time?
You spin my wheel.
I think I am actually going to try to watch Doubt this week. And then I think I will probably also watch the movie Raw, because that's one I've been meaning to get to for a while here.
I brought this up last time, but I could go back to the idea of doing German film.
Mm-hmm.
Deutschland.
I haven't seen Goodbye Lenin. I could try. Das Boot's 3 hours. I can't do that. I've already seen the Untergang. I think another one I would see is... what do you think would be a good Werner Herzog film to watch? Because I don't think I've ever seen a Werner Herzog film.
Well, the go-to is...
Was not a virtual gaze.
You must not the virtual gaze. The go-to is Aguirre, The Wrath of God.
Okay.
If you want to do something more interesting, I haven't seen this, but based on what I've heard of it, it sounds like it could make for a very interesting discussion. Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans.
Oh my god, I need to see that. maybe I should just turn this into a Werner Herzog episode and just leave Goodbye Lenin to another time, because I need to watch, because Bad Lieutenant Port of Call New Orleans seems like the kind of batshit crazy thing I need right now. I'm also interested, apparently his version of Nosferatu is really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And like there's conversations to be had about that, and what that has to do. He has a movie called My Son, What Have You Done, which is quite simply the greatest title ever put to a film.
I know nothing about that movie, so
neither do I. I just love the title so much.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll watch Akira, The Wrath of God, and Bad Lieutenant.
That will be.
And actually, I think maybe that's very representative of Werner Herzog, because Werner Herzog is a very peculiar man who kind of just seems to do whatever the fuck he feels like doing at any particular time.
Oh, yes.
He seems to have like no assertions about like legacy or his identity or anything, and that makes him really interesting.
Yeah.
He's also someone he's actually been shot on camera, and his only reaction was, "Oh."
You know, it's funny. I was watching that clip right before we started doing this podcast.
It's a great clip.
It's an excellent clip. And I'd never seen it before that.
And Mark Commode's there saying, "Oh my God, you've been shot." It's like, no, it's just okay.
Garrett, what are you planning to watch for next time?
Okay, I am planning to do a Makoto Shinkai double feature.
Ooh.
Featuring The Place Promised in Our Early Days and 5 centimeters per second.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never heard of either of these.
They're both anime films.
Okay.
I think I've seen some of The Place Promised in Our it's The Place Promised in Our younger days, correct?
In our early days. Yeah.
In our early days. If what I recall is accurate, I remember it being hauntingly gorgeous, but also somewhat frustrating. But I am curious about what you might get from that, because like his film My Name just kind of broke like all like filmic barriers.
You mean Your Name?
Your Name, yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That movie is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. But I got some Werner Herzog to watch. I'm very excited for next week.
Yeah, this will be another wondrous winding episode of the Hack Fraud Show coming your way.
I kind of like how like twisting and like all over the place these have gotten. Because the best episodes of the Vidiots are always the one where they just kind of ping pong from thing to thing.
Yeah.
And go all over the place.
All right. Well, we will be back next time with many things to talk about, I'm sure. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.